Welcome back to Brown Bag Research. Today we're talking about just workshopping your research paper if you're working on it. And I pulled up some information. There's a lot of things that go into it, so you need to ask your professors. You need to make sure that you're working in your discipline so that you have your methodology, you understand what they expect from you. So what I'm giving you is more or less what I expect and what a sort of traditional research paper is. But different professors will have different qualifiers. So definitely check your syllabus for the course and see what they have given you as specifics. If you're not sure, ask. Otherwise, you can come to one of our sessions and we'll workshop your papers, answer any questions you might have. So I started out with my students. There seems to be a big confusion between essays and research papers. And an essay is one where it's informal. A lot of times it has stories in it or emotive language, that is language to get your emotions going. It often has words I and me, your opinion, in other words, in it, whereas a research paper tends to be much more formal and the language is more formal. So you're not going to use first person, it's always going to be third person. So no I's, me's, no we's. It's very formal language. You also are going to find with a research paper that the style of writing should reflect what you would find in a journal article, like when you researched. So if you're wanting to see how that's done, go to the library, find a journal in your area, and look at the writing styles. Now, do keep in mind that often those who have been in the field a long time can get away with using a little bit of informality in their being informal in their language in their papers. So if that's the case, just remember that you're still an undergraduate, and for undergraduate papers, often we're trying to get you to hone your skills to the point where you can write a very formal research paper, and then later on, as you get the credentials of the master's and the PhD, you can sort of blur the lines again. The idea is to give you enough skill sets in both writing essays and writing formal research papers where you can decide, given the setting, which works best, which you need to employ given your audience. So the tips I'm giving you right now are sort of formal research paper tips. And you want to make sure that at all times you're adhering to those standards. Now I brought this is, as you can see it, this is the Chicago style manual, right? Everything you need to know about writing a paper is in here, and every one of your style manuals has something like that. It's usually online. And you can go to them and they will tell you exactly how an MLA or an APA paper should be written. It has every bit of information. It has examples. So if you need a guide to writing or even getting published, these are the types of things that you need to have standby. Now, you don't need to buy that one. That was rather expensive, and now it's 16th edition and out of date. So, you don't want to buy them, but you can go get them online. And that way you know exactly what you're looking for. Now, if you're trying to publish, then you want to make sure you go to that journal or that publishing house and look at what they require, because each of them will have slightly different requirements. Like I just turned in a book to an international publishing house, and part of the things that we had to go through was deciding whether we were going to use American grammar or English grammar. And so a lot of times you have to make these decisions along with your publisher, your editors, to decide how it's going to go. But there's always a listing of this is what we want. This is how you should do it for this journal, this publishing house, or Chicago, MLA, or APA. So definitely go to those. Remember that when you're writing a research paper, you are not writing an essay. So for the most part, what you want to do is focus on what your experts say in that field, not what you think or what you think they say, but what are they actually saying? Put them in conversation. And in the last session, we worked on fixing our thesis statements and our introductions and then our outlines and having a conversation with our outline. So our outline is not just a roadmap from here to here, but literally we use it to put in the information that we're using. So if I, in my course, require 8 sources, your outline should have exactly what from those 8 sources you're going to use and where, along with any indirect or direct quotes you're going to use. So that when you're looking at your outline visually, you'll be able to see if you need to add more information in one area or maybe take an area away. But outlines are supposed to be interactive, not just one word sentence or one word for each area. You really want sentences. You want to be complete in what you're doing so that you can actually look at it and know where you're starting, where you're headed, and where you're stopping. And that'll help you keep it formal because you'll know exactly what it is about your experts that you want to discuss. You'll know exactly how they communicate with each other and how they're in conversation with each other. You'll be able to compare them and contrast them in an interesting way. It makes your audience want to read on. So it's not just so-and-so said this, and then so-and-so said this, and then so-and-so said this. But your outline allows you to put these people in conversation. According to this person, this is the case, but this person disagrees with this, but will later agree with some other aspect, or basically agrees with this, but changes it ever so slightly to fit this circumstance. So now you're having this back and forth in an interesting conversation in your paper. And at no time are you having to say anything about your opinion. So getting started, look for academic, and we've done this in others, but just to review, looking for academic sources, go out, do your research on a broad topic, see what's out there, do your research, read everything, and from there, you're going to form a conclusion. Read as many perspectives as you can. You're going to form a conclusion about the idea, and that basically becomes your thesis statement, or at least your introductory paragraph. This is what I'm going to write on. Your thesis statement then says how I'm going to organize the paper. Sometimes it's actually more than one statement. But it leads your reader to first the paper will discuss this, and then this, and then this, and you don't want to be that sort of dramatic, but it's not a bad idea to be that on point when you're setting up your introduction for yourself in your first draft. I know a lot of areas want your thesis statements to be eloquent and beautiful and almost hidden so people don't notice them. And that's a wonderful thing. But if you're not a skilled writer, that can be extraordinarily difficult to achieve. So it's better to have a little bit of a clunky thesis statement than to have no thesis statement at all. A thesis statement will help you organize your paper. It helps your reader know what you're writing about. So at least start out with a very basic thesis statement. So you might want to say something like, this paper will begin with a brief history and definitional discussion of critical theory, followed by a discussion of how critical theory and neoliberal theories differ regarding the concept of multiculturalism in education. The paper will conclude with the pedagogical constructs and emphasis on transformative education found in critical theory, and how it provides a broader definition of multiculturalism that both advances student outcomes and promotes social justice issues in education. Okay, that's one. I grabbed one of mine. And maybe that's not where you're headed, but notice it outlines exactly what's going to happen in the paper, so that when people pick up your paper, they're not guessing at what you're saying. They're just literally following it. Again, now, this may be particular to philosophy and religious studies. We aren't necessarily, depending upon your audience, interested in a lot of jargon. So again, gauge your audience. If you're writing for a professional journal, then yes, you're going to have professional jargon in there. There's going to be very specific things to your topic. If you're writing a more general paper, say for undergraduate research or something like that, then you want to make sure that it's very clear that your audience can understand what you're saying. So make sure that you define your terms. You can always do that in a footnote. And quite frankly, if you have a footnote or a secondary conversation going in footnotes, it makes your paper look more impressive. So it's never a bad thing to start working on how to promote that secondary conversation in your footnotes. That's going to have everything that you don't really want to put in the paper, but you do want them to know about, or that you do want them to know you know about, so that nobody comes up and says, well, you forgot this aspect. No, I put it in a footnote. It just wasn't relevant to my paper initially, but I did want it there. So think about how you're going to structure your footnotes and what you want to say in that. Other things to look at when you do a research paper, do a formal research paper, and I see this ever growing, don't use questions. Don't ask questions in a research paper for a couple of reasons. One, it really isn't fair because your opposition can't answer the question and honestly can't tell you that it's an inappropriate question or that you have committed a fallacy. A lot of times, people, when they ask questions, are asking fallacious questions. So they're embedding things into the question that you wouldn't want to do. So it's not fair to throw a question at your opponent and say, here you go, right? The other problem with questions is rarely does the person asking the question ever answer it themselves. So it's like a shark attack. You run by, you bite them, and you run away, right? And off to something else. It's really unfair. And from a law standpoint, it actually damages your paper more than helping your paper. So if you're working on an argument, you don't want to put in questions of any kind. Now, I do know that some of you in like the social sciences will have a question that you're working on. Definitely put that in. The types of questions I'm talking about are the questions that you throw in there to sort of attack an opponent and leave. Eliminate those from your papers. It's not a very sophisticated way of writing, and people really will have problems with that because they will see it as an attack. And most of the time what you're wanting is a very objective paper. You don't want to put in your emotions, and that's another thing that we'll get to here in a minute, but you want your paper to sound very objective. Even if you care a great deal about what you're talking on, you still want to frame your paper in an objective manner. You don't want to make it stilted in one direction because your readers are going to see that, and many of them will dismiss you right away. So research papers need to be fairly objective, which means they also need to give all perspectives, not just the one you like. That's suppressing the evidence, which is another fallacy. You don't want to suppress the evidence. In other words, if the readers knew about the evidence you're not talking about, they would change their mind on your conclusion. So don't hide it. If your opponent has a legitimate point, and most of them do, then you want to recognize their expertise and their points and what is legitimate about their argument. Then you want to go on and show where they have problems in their argument and where you now can help solve those with your experts. All right, so it's a discussion between experts. It's not a discussion between you. You have to stay out of it, put yourself on a shelf, and talk about what your experts are saying, okay? And so we want to make sure that we're objective in that. Do not put your personal opinion, notes over here, into your research paper. They just don't belong there. Now, some professors do want you to put a personal opinion in there, in which case go with their guidelines, but a lot of times they want it in the conclusion, not throughout. In other words, remember that you are not an expert at this point. We have to have enough humility to know when people are experts and when they're not, and when we're not an expert. So if you're not an expert in the field, have the humility to admit that and focus on what the experts say. And then if your professor requires a personal statement, I would probably put it in the conclusion, because then it appears that you've gone through and you've looked at all perspectives on this, all sides, and here's what you've concluded after considering the conversations and the arguments of all the different experts. It's a much stronger paper that way. Make sure you're citing right. We went over citations last time. Purdue OWL, again, is still a good place to go. Your style manuals will always tell you exactly how your citations need to be. The one thing that drives me crazy is students have stopped putting in page numbers. And you really need your page number in there. Basically, your citations are so that your reader can go find the article and find the exact page where you got that information. It shouldn't be a struggle for them. They shouldn't have to re-research your paper. So if you think about citations as being very practical, they tell you exactly where you got that information. So anybody can fact check you, and there's a lot of that going on right now. Make sure that you are citing both direct and indirect quotes. Indirect quotes are difficult, and so I've pulled up something here that might help you with writing paraphrases and summaries. And this is for Purdue OWL. It says, use a statement that credits the sources somewhere in the paraphrase or summary, such as according to proposal, and then go on. That lets your audience know that it's not coming from you, it's coming from someone else. And so we are very clear on who is saying what in your paper. Another tip, if you're having trouble summarizing, try writing your paraphrase or summary on the text without looking at the original, okay? And then check your paraphrase against the original to see, did I use the same words? And remember what we talked about last time was that you can't just take out a few words and put in a few words from thesaurus, because that's still stealing their sentence structure. So it's got to be completely different, but still have the same idea. So taking it out, writing it on your own, and then checking back with your source is an excellent way to see if you've done it. Now, if you can't get away from using their words, put parentheses, quote them, and then give the page number. Sometimes there are phrases or words that are just brilliant, and you can't think of a better way to say it. Cite it. Quotation marks around it. Make sure you're giving credit where credit is due. And that really ups your the way people perceive you in your writing as professional. It brings your writing from a lower level to a higher level. And most of you are trying to go from that beginning and freshman level to graduate level, so that your writing is now accepted by graduate schools, which is taking you to your eventual publications. Don't use emotive language. Don't make judgments in your paper. Again, this is a formal, objective research paper. What are the experts saying? So if you're talking about the Holocaust, you don't have to tell me how horrible it is. That goes without saying. Every time you use these emotive words, people will see you as biased. And so that will delegitimize your paper to a certain extent. So don't use emotive language. Now, it can be argued that all language is emotive, true. But what we're looking for is getting rid of the prejudicial, the poisoning the well words. That is, if I drop this word, like so-and-so is a fascist or their fascist discussion, notice I've already poisoned the well, right? So from then on, you have a view of that person and what they're about. So you want to take all the poisoning the word out of there, poisoning the well words out of there. It's hard to say. And don't use your emotive language. For some people, that is very difficult. Leave your flowery language, leave your emotive language for your essays. Take them out of your research papers. You'll sound more professional, your paper will read more professionally. All in all, it's just going to give you a much higher look at what you're doing. Always use active voice, never passive voice. That's a difficult one. Again, if you don't know the difference between the two, go to Purdue Allow. Honestly, you can just Google it. And it will show you the difference between active and passive voices. Now, there are times when passive voice can be used. For instance, I do a lot of interdisciplinary work. So I work a lot with indigenous voices. And indigenous languages are always in the passive. They're verb-oriented. But Western academics and Western languages are really prejudiced towards active voices. So you have to be very careful about bringing in the passive voice and making it clear. So when I first started publishing, I would get comments that talked about my stylistic differences, that there was a tension between the active and passive voice. And what I learned was I had to explain in the beginning of my publication that I understand the syntax changed. It has to, because we're talking about indigenous people and their voice and what they're saying. So they're not going to say it in a Western fashion. Once I started communicating that, which by the way makes a great footnote, it really has stopped the syntax issues for people. They begin to understand. So a lot of what you want to make sure of, and you can use your footnotes for, so if you're doing an introductory chapter on your thesis or your dissertation, you want to make sure and put in some things on your methodologies that specifically address these issues. So I always put something in about, yes, I know the syntax is going to flip back and forth. There's a reason for that, because these cultures communicate very differently. So look up active and passive voices. If your faculty members are putting that down, you need to know it. Make sure that you are up to date on things like commas, and if people are saying you need to buy a box of commas, you need to re-up your knowledge on commas. And again, you can go to Purdue Isle, you can look at the style menu, you can go and just Google it, and it will help you. We've gone over third person, never first person. And this is an old style, and this may be, I don't know, telling my age a bit, but don't use contractions in a research paper. Some people may allow it now, that's relaxing a little bit, but if you want to really hit a formal level and gain those skills, do not use contractions in your research papers. Never start sentences with and but. It's just not done. It's not formal. It's informal and can be used in essays and is very useful sometimes in essays to get that informal voice going. But in a formal paper, people will look at that and go, that's just not very sophisticated writing. Possessives. Over the past 7 to 10 years, I have noticed that we're having trouble with possessives, especially with words that end in S. I'm going to go ahead and blame MLA for this, because it used to be, in the good old days, I suppose, that if a word ended in an S, you just put the apostrophe afterwards, and everybody knew that was possessive, right? MLA has started this thing where now you put, if it ends in an S, you put apostrophe and another S. And I think that's mixing people a bit, because I'm getting more and more papers where students just don't know how to do possessives. And I think that's coming from where to put the little possessive mark. So make sure you look at that. And if you're somebody that is confused about it, it's better to find out ahead of time and fix your paper than to hand it in and not have it there. Another thing that you want to avoid is statements all, none, or no, because you cannot support those in a research paper. There's really, and this may be a philosophical issue problem, but what we know is empirically there's nothing where all or no, none. You can always find an empirical some, one, and that defeats your whole article. If I'm saying all people do this, all I have to do is find one person that doesn't do that and I win. So using supportable words, qualifiers, some people do this. Many is a iffy one. Can you support that many people believe this? You can always go with some people believe this because there's always somebody who'll believe anything, right? It's conspiracy theorists. But if you're looking at making your argument more sophisticated, making your paper more sophisticated, you really want to go with the qualifier and not make statements that you cannot support with your research. Okay? Along that same lines, you never want to use something like throughout history or throughout time or from the beginning of time, because you can't support those at all. I get those a lot when I'm dealing with race and gender issues. Throughout history, women have been struggling for their rights. Well, that's not even correct. Because many cultures, women had equal rights, always did. People of color have always fought for equality. That isn't correct either, because depending upon what group and what area of the world, they had equality. So you don't want to use these phrases, and I know students want to start out with them, but they're like getting that hook in there. You don't want a hook. You don't want a cute little phrase to start it out with. You don't want a cute little story. This is a research paper, so what you want to do is start very factually, give the information, don't make claims you can't support, and move on. Okay. The final thing I have, of course, we went over plagiarism before, but the final thing I have is proofreading. I keep getting these students who say I work best under pressure. Maybe so, maybe not. But what I usually find is that they haven't proofread their paper and they miss a lot of points because they make silly mistakes. And so proofreading is essential. Proofreading, nobody likes to do it. It's really necessary. A long time ago, a professor of mine in undergraduate, he required us to proofread. But at that time, we were only allowed, if we made 3 major mechanical errors, we failed the paper. And that was back in the age when we had typewriters. You had to retype the whole thing. It wasn't like computers where you just fix it. You worked really hard to get your grammar correct. So to do that, his recommendation was to take your paper and read it sentence by sentence backwards. And by doing that, you will catch your mistakes because it takes it out of context. If you keep reading it forward and keep reading it forward, your brain knows what you want to say, And so it will just skip over things like instead of TWO, you have TOW. Happened to me fairly recently in an email where I kept skipping over the wrong month. And I sent out the email and people are like, you put the wrong month in there. Like, well, my brain kept saying the right month. Clearly, I was not seeing it. I proofread it several times, so it can happen to anybody, and it does. So proofreading it backwards helps. Handing it to someone else to proofread to catch any big errors, or take someone in your class that knows the topic as well as you do. You've been talking about switch papers. Don't let anybody write it for you, but you can at least say, oh, do you realize that you forgot to capitalize here? They can catch those types of things, but do pick people who are good editors. Don't pick people that are worse editors than you. That is not. So these are some of the things that I tell my classes that I find annoying as I read research papers. I'm sure other professors have other annoying things that they find. It's not a bad idea to ask your professor, so what does annoy you in a research paper? So that you can make sure you're not doing it, right? We all have our pet peeves. And I guess I'm going to pick on Dr. Knowles. What are your pet peeves now that we're opening this up to everybody?
Well, we've written enough together that you know where mine are, and you've covered most of them. The commas, people, I don't know if it's a method of teaching writing now or what the problem is there, but the commas within a sentence make all the difference in the world. I could show a number of grammatical examples of that where one comma changes the meaning of the word. So please pay attention to commas. If you don't know where they go, a rule of thumb, the old rule of thumb is wherever you pause for breath in a sentence, wherever you pause between clauses in a sentence, that's where you put a comma. But you can be more precise. Just know if you're not putting commas in your sentences and they're compound sentences, then they are gibberish. They make no sense. So make sure you go back and polish that point. The other thing, well, you've already said it, is make sure your citations are proper. I think K through 12 doesn't teach it properly. They teach you to cite a quote, but they don't tell you when you lift an idea that you need to cite it as well. Dr. Lovern made reference to paraphrasing and the like, but even if it's paraphrased, it needs to be properly cited back to the appropriate page. And there's another issue. So much of our citation material comes off the internet now, and there's no possibility, in some cases, of citing to a page. Cite to a paragraph, or if you can cite to a page, even if it's not a direct quote, please do cite to the page. It's not that your professors want to find some way to go back and catch you in a mistake. That's not the issue. What you're doing is fully informing the reader, so that if you put some provocative idea in there that really lights a fire with me, if you cite it properly, now I can go back and get more information on that provocative idea. So the idea is not to catch you in your errors, like it might have been K through 12. The idea here is to make sure that your arguments are grounded and have a good foundation, but to also to allow your reader to go back and embellish the ideas that you presented. Go back and get more information. So that's my 2 or 3 major problems.
Thank you. And I just to add to that, because that's really good. For those of you who are going to graduate school, I always present it as defensive writing. If you're focusing just on your experts and you're citing them, then if you get somebody about to attack you, you can always say, hey, I didn't say that. This is who said it. I'm just citing them. It's defensive writing. And when you go into grad school, there's going to be a little bit of a push where you need defensive writing. So think about the fact that you can take yourself out of this so that other people can take the blame, I guess is the way to put it, in case you're wanting to save yourself. We do it all the time at conferences. It's hilarious. Oh, Dr. Knowles, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I have another thing to add to that in terms of defensive writing. Now, Dr. Lovern comes from philosophy, but I come from a legal background, a sociological background. And what you want to do, probably in both of those fields, because they're so riddled with controversy, not unlike philosophy, is you want to anticipate the arguments of the opponent. Okay, anticipate the arguments of the opponent and fully address those. And as you get into academia, or some of y'all may want to go to law school, when you're writing a legal brief or something of that nature, you're writing not only for somebody to persuade them to your position, but also you're going counter to somebody else's opinion on a lot of things. So in academia, we all have, if we publish a lot, like Dr. Lovern does, and like I do, we have people we've never met that are consistently critics on things that we've written. And we don't know these people from Adam's house cat, but they seem to, every time we generate a journal article or a book, they're the first ones in line to take their shots. So you have to anticipate what the opposition will ask or will argue and deflate their argument in the narrative of your paper. So wherever you have intellectual problems in your paper, you definitely need to bolster those areas. So write in a defensive mode. That's a very, very good piece of advice, because that allows you then to anticipate the arguments of those people who will critique it. And I'm not saying those critics are being harsh or unreasonable. They make us all honest. They make us better academics. But I am saying that as your writing gets more sophisticated and your audience grows, then people will actually lay in the bushes waiting to find something to quibble with you about. So be aware of that.
It sounds so ominous. It's a lot of fun eventually to get into these
Yeah, it is.
conversations. So
I'm not saying they're going to come to your house and knock on your door, but I'm just saying that's the reality of being an academic. I mean,
yeah,
it is good for us. I mean, there are people who write in our fields, Dr. Lovern's field, my field, that whenever I see something in writing from them, I know that I'm going to argue with them. So perhaps I provide that service to them. That makes sense.
makes us better at what we do. Well, let me also get some other people in here. Um, Jesse, do you have anything to add from the graduate student level?
I will say that this is actually very beneficial to me. Being because to hear different perspectives on writing, because I'm in the political science field and we kind of write a little bit differently and do things a little bit differently. But to hear from both of you was very beneficial to me, and I think that's going to help undergraduate students to hear from different perspectives in different fields on different ways of writing. Um, because I think, like you stated, one of the things I struggle with is to make it more academic and not personal. Trying to take all that personal thoughts and opinions out of it and make it more academic. And the more papers you do and the further along you get in your education, the more professors and writers and things you come across, the more experience you get, the better you get at it. But it's a learning process. Like, you can't beat yourself up about it, because I mean, I I wrote papers, but I am still terrified when I start writing a new paper, because it's a different topic, it's a different perspective, it's a different thing, and that's okay because it's part of the learning process. Which is one reason why I'm happy that we're doing this, because this would have been very beneficial to have as an undergraduate student, to reference back to and be like, hey, that's a good opinion to have. Oh, I like that viewpoint, and even be able to reference back to the person who said it. Hey, you stated this. Can you give me a little bit of knowledge on what you're talking about? So I've actually learned more from this than I have to offer to it. So thank y'all for that.
Well, thank you for the comments. I mean, this is what we want to do. We want to give the information out there, because sometimes we don't have time in class to cover all this. You know, we're so busy, and especially with our shortened semester this semester, we aren't going to have time to cover everything. So if you have an outside resource, hopefully it'll help everybody. I want to see if PJ wants to add something, or if you have a question for us. Like a radio announcer, do you have a question for us?
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Well, from what I got from this is that I see that the problems that I have in my writing is very common, actually. Like, it's all little steps that we all have to take to become a good writer. And since I'm in the business field, I know that I might not this type of writing might not be like my stronghold or my important part of my business major, but I know it's very needed because I still need to explain what I'm trying to explain in a better way for everybody to learn and explain where I got it from and how I got it from.
That's wonderful. It is different, and I think just knowing some of these tricks of trade, it seems to me, I've been doing this about 36 years now, and at the university level, and students usually have like 4 or 5 grammatical mistakes that they make, and they're just habits. If we can, and this is what I try and do in my courses each semester, if we can get in and eliminate those 4 or 5 mistakes, it's amazing how much better the person's writing becomes and how much more confident they have in their writing and in expressing what they really want to express, because most of us want to be able to explain our positions and have people listen to us. We just may not have the skills, and it is all about the skills. So it's nothing personal. You're not birthing children in your papers. You're just writing your papers. And so it's about upping the skills. You know, if I wanted to learn to play oboe, I would have to practice and practice and practice and gain the skills. And it's the same here. So I think we often don't teach or don't express that we understand these are skill based. And if you didn't get it K through 12, and we know that most don't anymore, then we have to step back and help students with it. And you know, BJ, anytime any of us here can help you, just you see our names, you can certainly give us a call or text us. That's all we do now is computers. We used to do people, now we just do computers. But hopefully that will change. Do you have
Okay.
anything else?
Going back to when you said how like the best way to cite information and quotations, can you go over that again, please?
Sure, be happy to. So when we're quoting something, we usually talk about direct quotes, which is where you take the exact words of your source and put it in your paper. If it's more than 3 lines, you need to indent it altogether. But otherwise, you just put it in quotation marks and put the citation with the page at the end. So who said it? And your citation style will change whether you're MLA, APA, or Chicago. And the tricky parts with citation is really the indirect quotes. You have to cite the indirect quotes. And so even if you get an idea from your expert, you have to say according to so-and-so and then cite it with, again, the page number. Or you may not say according to so-and-so. You may just go ahead and give the idea, but at the end, you put the author's last name and depending upon which, maybe the year of the publication, but you still need the page number. What you cannot do is use like more than 3 words or 4 words of the text. So you have to be very careful to put everything in your own words, and that's where it becomes difficult because a lot of people were taught K through 12, and I know who does that because even with young people I've known in K through 12, they come home and they're taught to take out 2 or 3 words and put in 2 or 3 words from a thesaurus. It's like, no, that's still plagiarism because you're stealing the sentence structure of the person who wrote it. So you have to take the idea out and kind of mull it around in your head, put it in your own words, and then put it into the paper and then still cite the source. And that's why it's kind of hard to do that. So if you mull it around in your head and write it out on a piece of paper. And then go back and check and see if you've used too many words from the author, or if you've used the author's sentence structure. And it's a skill like anything else. You get better at it with practice. It does take some practice, though. The biggest problem that we have is that people think things are common knowledge. And common knowledge only works when you are a person who is an expert. So undergraduates need to be humble and realize that they are not experts. And at that point, you can sort of make sure you quote it, you give the citation and all that. So those are some of the tricks of it. Also, we have citation information at the library. You can always go to your research librarians. We'll always work on that and help you with that. But that's about the best I can give you without knowing your field and knowing exactly what you're quoting. Anybody have anything to add to that? Oh, and Danielle put in the chat box the live link to the library, which is really cool. So if you're working on your paper, you can just go to that and ask them live, help me, I need help. And they're always there. They're always there to help. And they're great at it. I mean, that's some of their favorite stuff, is to help students. So I don't think students take enough advantage of, well, not that I want you to take advantage of them, but take advantage of the service them. And let them help you if you're struggling on something. That's always a good idea. I've gone to them many times and said, I'm really having trouble. Can you help me find this? I can't find it anywhere. And usually they have an answer. I've worked with Danielle for years, and she used to find me things I never knew about. So always take advantage of the opportunities around you. Anything else? I'm not hearing anything from anybody. Anybody want to add anything finally? All right, then I guess we'll sign off for today. It's been great fun, and I hope this helps you. Let your friends know. Otherwise, take care. We'll talk to you later.